Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into some really interesting stuff today. If you're here, you're probably the kind of person who stays on top of their health, right? Like you know about resources like HIV RNA test guide podcast, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
With, what is it, over 4,500 testing labs across the US?
That's right, yeah.
So testing, knowing your status, that's
Yeah.
obviously crucial. But today, we're kind of like zooming out a bit. We're looking at the big picture of HIV prevention.
Okay, yeah.
And especially with all these incredible advancements in long-acting prevention methods.
Absolutely.
There's this big question that keeps coming up. In this new era of prevention, do we still need an HIV vaccine?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? A lot of researchers and public health experts are wrestling with that right now.
Right.
And to really dig into this, we should probably take a quick trip down memory lane. Like, what's the history of HIV vaccine research?
Yeah, for sure. The search for an HIV vaccine has been going on for, what, like decades now?
Yeah,
I remember back in, I think it was 2009, there was this huge wave of optimism.
Yeah.
A trial in Thailand showed that a certain vaccine regimen could actually reduce new HIV infections. It wasn't a huge reduction, a little over 30%.
Yeah, that's right.
But back then, it felt like a massive breakthrough,
Oh, absolutely. It was like, finally, some proof that a protective immune response against HIV was possible. But science is rarely straightforward, right?
It never is it?
Unfortunately, the trials that followed, trying to build on that initial success, well, they didn't quite pan out the way everyone hoped.
Yeah.
They tried adapting the approach for different HIV subtypes, especially the ones prevalent in Southern Africa.
Right.
But no dice. And actually, since then, no late-stage HIV vaccine trial has hit its primary endpoint.
So that kind of shows just how tough HIV is, right? I mean, It's not like other viruses where we've figured out vaccines that work like a charm. HIV is always mutating, changing its game, finding a weak spot that we can consistently target. It's like trying to hit a moving target,
It really is. That constant genetic variability, it means our immune system and any vaccine we try to develop has a really hard time generating a response that's broadly protective. And then, you mentioned it earlier, pre-DP came along and really changed things.
Oh, yeah, big time. First, there was the daily pill, right? Oral PPP, a total game changer. People could significantly reduce their risk just by taking a pill every day.
Huge step forward.
But now, we're in the age of long-acting injectable pre-PP. These medications give you protection for much longer periods, like cabotegravir from V Healthcare, bought and approved, and you just get an injection every few months. And Gilead Sciences is working on lenacapavir, which might even extend that to every 6 months. Talk about convenient.
I know, right? It's a whole new ballgame in terms of adherence. Makes prevention way more accessible for so many people.
Totally. But here's the thing, and this is where things get tricky. With these super effective long-acting pre-P options out there, how do you even test a new vaccine? Like ethically and practically, it gets really complicated.
Yeah, it's a real ethical dilemma.
In a traditional vaccine trial, you'd have a control group that doesn't get the vaccine right.
Right.
But if we're talking about long-acting injectable PEP, that's basically, what, close to 100% effective?
Pretty much, yeah.
Can you really withhold that kind of protection from the control group? It doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it definitely raises some eyebrows. I mean, Paul Volberding, he's a chief medical editor over at Helio Infectious Disease News. He basically said that with highly effective PrEP on the scene, having a control group in a vaccine trial is almost impossible.
Makes sense.
And we're already seeing this play out in the research world. The pre-PVAC trial, remember that one?
Yeah, vaguely.
It was looking at combining a potential vaccine with other prevention methods, but they had to stop it last year.
Oh, wow.
And right now, there are no late-stage HIV vaccine trials happening at all.
Really? None?
Nope. The whole research community is kind of in this holding pattern, trying to figure out how to design vaccine trials in this new landscape.
Wow. So, what are they saying? What are the ideas out there?
Well, at the HIV-R4P conference, Sandhya Vasan, she's a big name in HIV research, she talked about all the intense debate happening around how to design ethical trials for future vaccine candidates.
Okay.
And Karl Diefenbach from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, he stressed that we absolutely have to bring ethicists into the conversation.
Yeah.
And we need to hear from the communities most affected by HIV. It's got to be a collaborative effort to figure this out.
For sure.
I thought this was interesting. Volberding suggested maybe we could use large, long-term cohort studies instead of traditional trials.
Okay, so like what would that look like?
Basically, you'd follow big groups of people over time, but without the whole placebo control thing.
Right.
It's more observational, less about directly intervening. But you can still get a ton of valuable data that way.
Interesting. So even if they figure out the whole trial design thing, there's another big hurdle, right? These long-acting pre-EP options, they've set the bar really high for any future vaccine.
Oh, absolutely. You've got lenacapavir showing something like 96 to 100% efficacy in trials.
Wow.
So any new vaccine is going to be judged against that incredibly high standard.
Right. So it's got to be really good.
Exactly. Volberding actually brought up this point. He said, even if you had a vaccine that was, let's say, 90% effective.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Some people might still prefer the near certainty of that twice-yearly pre-EP injection.
Right, because they know it works so well.
Exactly. He even called these long-acting treatments a twice-yearly chemical vaccination. He's really pushing for wide access to lenacapavir, thinks it could be a game changer in ending the epidemic.
I see. So the question is, even if we have a vaccine that's pretty good, will people actually choose it over something that's almost guaranteed to work?
Right. And this was something that Mitchell Warren from AVAD brought up at the conference, too. AVAC's an advocacy group focused on global HIV prevention.
Oh, okay.
Warren said that the old standard for a vaccine, like aiming for 50% efficacy, just doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, not with these new pre-EP options.
We need to be aiming much higher now. The goalposts have definitely moved.
But even with all these challenges, all the experts seem to agree that we still need to be working towards an HIV vaccine, right?
Yeah, there's a real consensus on that. And one of the big reasons that keeps coming up is choice. You know, people need different options for HIV prevention.
Right. One size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. This was a huge theme at the HIV-R4P conference. William Hahn, for instance, said communities affected by HIV are really vocal about wanting a diverse range of prevention tools.
Makes sense. Everyone has different needs, different lifestyles, different risk factors. What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. And Diefenbach made a great point about this, too. He said that having more options allows us to target prevention efforts more effectively.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. Different groups have different levels of risk, different barriers to accessing care. Having a toolbox full of different prevention tools lets us tailor our approach to those specific needs.
Right.
And then there's the whole issue of stigma. A vaccine could be a really powerful tool in that regard. You know, for some people, taking a daily pill or getting injections, it can feel stigmatizing.
Yeah, I see that.
A vaccine, especially if it's something you can get during a regular doctor's visit, could bypass some of those social and personal barriers.
Absolutely. It's more discreet, more normalized.
Right. But even if we did manage to develop a fantastic HIV vaccine, Vassan cautioned that we'd probably still need other prevention options.
Okay, why is that?
Well, unless this hypothetical vaccine is some kind of miracle cure.
Like a magic bullet.
Yeah, exactly. Like, unless it's super affordable, easy to get everywhere, and accepted by everyone, we're probably still going to need those other tools in the toolbox.
Right, a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. Volberding said the same thing. To really end the HIV epidemic, we're going to need a combination of different strategies.
Makes sense. So we've talked about the science, the ethics, but what about the money? These long-acting injectables are super effective, but they're not cheap, right?
Oh, definitely not. Cabotegravir, for example, the wholesale cost in the U.S. is over $23,500 per year.
Wow, that's a lot.
And lenacapavir treatment is even pricier, over $42,000 annually.
That's a huge barrier for a lot of people.
It is. Both V and Gilead are working on licensing agreements to make generic versions available in lower-income countries, which is a huge step in the right direction. But even so, the International AIDS Society has pointed out that millions of people still won't be able to afford these treatments.
Yeah, the cost of healthcare is a major issue for so many people. And it really underscores those health equity concerns you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Now, with vaccines, it's hard to make direct cost comparisons because we don't have a widely available HIV vaccine yet.
Right.
But there was an analysis done back in 2017 that looked at potential costs for future HIV vaccines, and the projections were way lower. We're talking like a few dollars per person in low-income countries, maybe a few hundred or 1,000 in the U.S.
Okay, so potentially much more affordable.
Yeah. So in the long run, especially if we're thinking about global access and really getting a handle on the epidemic, A successful vaccine could be a much more cost-effective solution.
I see. So cost is a big factor in this whole debate. And then there's the issue of how long the protection lasts, right?
Absolutely. Mitchell Warren talked about this at the conference. He said that durability is one of the key differences between vaccines and long-acting PEP.
Okay, yeah.
With injectables, you have really high efficacy, but only while the drug is active in your system. A vaccine, on the other hand, could potentially give you protection for years, maybe even a lifetime, from just one or a few doses.
Wow, that'd be amazing.
It would. So it's kind of a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
High short-term efficacy with injectables versus the possibility of long-lasting protection from a vaccine.
Right. So which is better?
Well, Warren gave this interesting example. He said, imagine a vaccine that's, say, 80 or 90% effective and gives you protection for 3 years or more. That might actually be better for public health overall than a super effective injectable that you need to take every 6 months.
Interesting point. So It's not just about how well it works, but also how long it works for.
Exactly. But on the flip side, a vaccine that's not as effective and the protection fades quickly, that wouldn't be as ideal, obviously.
Makes sense. So it sounds like there's still a lot to figure out with vaccines.
Definitely. But even with all the hurdles, all the research that's been done on HIV vaccines, it hasn't been a waste, you know? It's actually led to some pretty amazing scientific discoveries that go beyond HIV itself.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, Volberding pointed out that a lot of what we learn about immunology and virology through HIV vaccine research, it actually played a big role in developing the mRNA vaccines for COVID.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. All those years of studying how to trigger specific immune responses, that knowledge really came in handy when the pandemic hit.
I never would have thought about that connection.
It's pretty cool, right? And it's not just about other diseases either. All that research on HIV has helped us understand how chronic viral infections work in general.
Right.
And it's actually informing research into finding a cure for HIV itself.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of coming full circle.
Exactly. Diefenbach mentioned that a lot of the vaccine candidates that look promising, the ones that trigger strong immune responses, they're also being studied for their potential in HIV cure research.
So the work on prevention and cure is all intertwined.
Yeah, they're definitely feeding into each other. It's all connected.
It's amazing how much we've learned about this virus. But it sounds like there's still a long way to go.
There is, yeah. But even with all the complexity, there's this undercurrent of optimism, you know?
Yeah, I get that sense too.
Like Jean Marazzo, she's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. She said that the fact that we're even having this debate
about whether we still need an HIV vaccine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
She said that in itself is a sign of progress. It means we actually have really good prevention options now.
Right. We're not starting from scratch anymore.
Exactly. She even imagined a future where we might have a moderately effective vaccine to add to our arsenal.
That would be huge.
It would. It would give people even more choices and bring us closer to ending the epidemic.
So, to kind of sum things up, it seems like HIV prevention is at a really interesting crossroads right now. We've got these amazing long-acting injectables, but the search for a vaccine is still super important.
Definitely. It's all about giving people options, finding solutions that are affordable and accessible worldwide, and of course, pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge.
And for our listeners out there, the folks who are already proactive about their health, who use resources like HIV testing services, I think it's so valuable to understand all of this.
I agree.
To see how much progress has been made and to be aware of all the different approaches being explored to prevent HIV. It helps you make informed choices about your own health and be a more engaged member of your community.
Absolutely. And on that note, here's something to think about. If you could design the perfect HIV prevention method, what would it look like?
Yeah, good question.
Would it be something like those super effective injectables or more like a long-lasting vaccine? What would be the ideal scenario?
Right. What would make it truly universal and destigmatized?
It's a great question to ponder. And we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations about HIV prevention going. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.